All right. Well, welcome back to the Inside the Rink podcast. Chris and Jade, it's the first time in a few weeks we've gotten together, and what a more fitting time than the YouTube debut, hey?
Yeah.
Yep.
And let's talk about
Jade,
that
how are you doing?
absolute banger of an intro.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We can talk about the banger of an intro, but, like, how are both of you doing?
Fantastic.
Yeah. Tired.
Yeah. I feel like that's the common denominator nowadays.
Mhm.
So, and just with the way that the night worked, it's running around, and that's where we are. But tonight we get to talk hockey, and what a better seat to be in. Talk hockey, and yeah. So, without further ado, it's just let's hear a word from our sponsor, DraftKings Sportsbook.
DraftKings Sportsbook is Boston's hometown sportsbook. It's live right here in Massachusetts. Bet local on all your favorite sports from the comfort of your own home with DraftKings. To celebrate, all new customers will receive up to $250 in bonus bets when you sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook using code ITR. You can now bet local on moneyline spreads, props, and more with one of America's top-rated sportsbooks. That's DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Sign up with the code ITR to get up to $250 in bonus bets to use now that mobile sports betting is live in Massachusetts. That's code ITR, and it's only at DraftKings Sportsbook.
If your loved one is experiencing problems with gambling, call 800-327-5050 or visit helplinema.org to speak with a trained specialist free and confidentially 24/7. Must be 21 plus. Physically present in Mass. Eligibility restrictions apply. Subject to regulatory licensing requirements. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. Opt-in required. Bonus issued as free bets. Terms at DraftKings.com/MA.
Well, it's always great to hear from our sponsor, and well, there's nothing better than hockey, in my opinion. But the latest 32 thoughts or one of the latest 32 thoughts, it's quite an interesting listen and whatnot. So, Chris, what are your thoughts on Elliot Friedman talking about expanded playoffs?
I, for one, kind of like it. Not a bad idea getting more teams involved, and it makes chaos. And you're seeing it in a lot of other sports. For instance, one of my favorite sports, college football, just went from 4 to 12 teams, and it caused nothing but chaos. Where you saw I believe it's a 7 and a 6 seed playing for the national championship. So it gets you a little difference. Also opens the door for different things. I'd be interested to see how they lay it out. Like, is it going to be a best of 3? You can't really do a best of 7. Do you do a best of 5? Can't do a 1 game.
Yeah, it's like I was thinking about if they expand it, because look at the AHL, like the American Hockey League. Look at how they have it set up. It's a 23-team format, which it's crazy to think that there's an odd amount of teams in the playoffs. But that's how they have it set up. There's buys, there's play-ins, and it's hard to wrap my head around as a credentialed member of an AHL team. So, but when I look at it as somebody from the outside, if the NHL were to do it, that's not a format I would want them to go with. Is the 16-team format currently it works because you have 16 teams in, 16 out. The lottery works the way it is. And then if you were to do a thing like 23, how does it work? Like, how's the play-in? Is it single game elimination? Is it best of 3? Is it best of 5? Like, what are we looking at here? So, like, what are you thinking about that?
I mean, if you're going to do it, the best way to do it is 1 through 6 are in, 7 plays 8, like they do in NBA. I don't know if you guys know how that format is, but 7 plays 8, 9 plays 10. You got to do a best of 3 at the very least. And then after that, I don't know if you would do it as 9 and 10 get in as the 8 and 7, 8. I mean, that's where you get complicated with it. But you could do like NBA does, where the winner of the 9-10 moves on. They play the loser of 7-8 and the winner of 7-8 the 7th seed, and then you do it that way where the winner of the next series moves on. They're the 8th seed.
Yeah. Jay, do you have any thoughts to add to that?
And my only thought is I really don't want to see an extended playoff. Personally, I feel like I think I've talked about this back when we kind of first restarted the podcast that the season already feels so long. It feels like everybody barely gets a break between playoffs and the draft, and I don't want to see that kind of increase unless the regular season gets shortened, but I don't see that happening. So it's kind of a weird spot, I feel like.
So that kind of leads me to my next thought on this topic is, if we were to go into an expanded playoff format, you would need to shorten the current format. That's what I'm thinking, is the first 2 rounds have to be at least 3 to 5 games at most. That's what I'm thinking. And then the conference finals can be where you kick in a 7-game series. Because admittedly, like, the first round of the playoffs could be 3, 4, 5-game series. Or 3 to 5, not 3, 4, 5.
I knew what you meant.
Yeah. I can also see the NHL keeping the current format that they have, but shortening it to where the last possible day is in the middle of June, and then there's a 2-week space for every team to breathe between the end of playoffs and the start of the draft. Because 2024 was a perfect example. The cup was hoisted like June 24th or the 26th or something. And there was only a couple of days for teams to get down to Vegas and get ready for the draft on the 28th. So there's not a lot of breathing room. And I get it. A lot of teams' front offices, when they're in playoffs, yes, they're in playoffs, but they're also worrying about the draft, free agency, things like that. Whereas teams that, we're bottom of the, or not they were bottom of the league this year and things like that, they're completely focused on the off season and what they're doing. So I don't want to say teams have an unfair jump, but it's professional sports, and sometimes you got to use the time that you do have, and maybe less dates on the calendar is a better thing. Like, I think we've all come to that conclusion.
Mhm.
And kind of with that said, I don't want to say less popular nowadays, but something that hasn't really caught my eye as much as it did 6 and maybe 7 years ago. The Winter Classic and the Stadium Series. Chris, take it away.
So the NHL announced, I believe Gary Bettman announced it, the Winter Classic this year, where next year it will be Panthers Rangers at, I believe it's Lone Depot Park in Miami. And the Stadium Series, I didn't see where the Stadium Series is going to be, but it is in Florida as well, with the Bruins and the Lightning playing. I'm interested to see how that's going to work out in Florida. Now,
Yeah.
Granted, Texas, a state that's usually pretty warm, just got a snowstorm. So who knows come January of next year what the weather is like in Florida, but interested by the choice for next year's Winter Classic and Stadium Series.
I'm really looking forward to that. I have said my entire life I have no reason to go to Florida. I don't want to go there, but for the Panthers Winter Classic, there is a chance I'm going to end up in Florida. So,
Well, I'm on the boat. Is when I saw that it was announced that it's in Florida, it just reminds me of when the NHL, they had a game in Vegas many moons ago, and it was very slushy and snowy, and I can't remember who was playing, but there were a lot of bad ice conditions. And do we see something like that in this?
I would like to think that the NHL has better technology now. They did the Winter Classic in Seattle last year, obviously, and we are not known for our cold winters. We're known for rainy winters, and luckily here we have the stadium that they did it in. The roof, it's a retractable roof, and so they kept it closed while they were building the ice. They kept it frozen. the best that they could, and there was actually no issues with the ice at all. So I'm hoping that with the way that, you know, newer technology, that'll be something that we can see with the Winter Classic next year.
And I think that'll be the case. So I think with the way that things have grown and how much attention they put to little things like this, is it should go better than most people expect it to. But
Mhm.
just off of face value, it being in Florida of all places, yeah, I can see
Miami, the
your point
Panthers,
there.
the Panthers will have a roof.
Yep.
The Lightning will not.
Okay.
And
And
usually, isn't the
speaking of,
Stadium Series later? Isn't it in March? So that's even. I mean, now we're approaching warmer, weather. So that could be with no roof. That could be an issue.
well, like I said, I haven't followed both of those Stadium Series Winter Classics in a few years. So, yeah, to me, it's like I see it and I'm like, great, but just the details of everything, and one having a roof and one not having a roof, one being earlier than the others, you would think they'd want to do it in colder months, not warmer months.
It will be February 1st for the Stadium Series.
Okay, so it's not entirely a warmer month. It's coming out of a colder month, but
I forgot. I thought there was one year that was in March. I think that's why I was thinking they're usually in March.
was that maybe the Lake Tahoe one?
Might have been
Might have been.
like early March.
Yeah. But yeah, well, kind of with the Winter Classic and Stadium Series stuff wrapped up, it's how about the Montreal Canadiens and how they're doing so far this year? Is Chris, as we've kind of chatted about this a bit, but they might be a threat to make the playoffs. And well, when you look at the Eastern Conference, it's an arms race there, and it's a wild Eastern Conference right now, not the wild West, but
It's
yeah.
a mess.
Oh, it's a mess. So take it away.
I mean, so right now, going into play tonight, the Bruins hold the first wild card spot with 47 points. Columbus holds the second spot with 46 points. After that, you got what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams that are 5 points behind Columbus. And that's Ottawa, Montreal, Detroit, Pittsburgh, the Rangers, Islanders, and Flyers. It's so wide open. You got 3 teams in Montreal, Detroit, and Columbus who are all red hot. Montreal is 7-2-1 in their last 10. Columbus has won 4 straight, and they're 7-2-1 in their last 10. And the Red Wings have won 7 straight, and they're 7-1-0 at least under McClellan. I'm trying to pull up 7-3-0 in their last 10. So 3 teams, 7 wins in their last 10 games, and they've all closed the gap. And Ottawa, a team that's kind of struggled since the Olmark injury. I mean, they haven't looked the same since he went down with that back injury, and I don't think he's returned yet. At least not from what I've seen. He hasn't played.
As far as I know, with the Allmark stuff, is he's out. It's not indefinite, but it's not going to be a short-term thing if he doesn't recover.
That's also what I heard.
Yeah.
The rest of this month, with the schedule that's coming up for all 3 of those teams, it's going to be really what decides it, I think. I mean, all 3 of those teams have a real shot, but the Red Wings have a tough one coming up. I mean, they got to play they're going on a 4-game road trip where they have the Panthers, Lightning, Stars, and Flyers before they play the Canadiens at home, and the Lightning, the Kings, Oilers, Flames, and Canucks. That's all before the shutdown for the 4 nations. Columbus, a little bit easier of a schedule. They got the Flyers, Sharks, Rangers, Islanders. Then it gets tough with the Leafs, Hurricanes, Kings, and Golden Knights. Montreal, they got Utah, Dallas, Toronto, Rangers, Lightning, Red Wings, Devils, Jets. So really, if you want to prove yourself, you got to start winning games against the teams that are in the playoff spot right now. So all 3 of those teams really have a statement to make, I think, over the rest of this month.
And it's going to be like in Ottawa's case, it's going to be a test of, are they a team that can perform without goaltending, or are they a team that can they perform, but are they going to perform under that bar? because their goaltender, who they're relying on, is injured. And that's going to expose the Senators. And I might get some heat for this, but the last few years have been it's been a great point to see what the Ottawa Senators have been built to be. They got rid of their coach, and just the way that things have evolved and how this team has matured. It's going to be a test of going through adversity, and it's also going to show who their captain really is, because at the end of the day, is if they can get through this next stretch before Allmark's back, and who knows whenever that is, you have to be in that space of he could be back tomorrow or he could be back close to playoffs. Like, you don't know when Linus Allmark is back. In the case of Detroit, it's the way that they've molded together under new coaching, is they built themselves as they built an identity for themselves. But this stretch is going to show a lot of things, and the main thing it's going to show is are they legit? Are they the team that they have shown to be under Todd McClellan? And are they going to make that last as long as it has? And finally, with Columbus, what a story they've been. Columbus it's been tragedy from day one for them. And their story this season has been on the unfortunate passing of Johnny Matthew Gaudreau, and just everything hasn't really clicked for them until they got together as a group and they've hunkered down, and they have the right coach. Dean Evison is an amazing coach, and with the way that they have been playing, is they're playing for each other, they're playing for their fans, and they're playing for themselves. And they have that little extra kick for themselves, and they're pushing together. So when you see the schedules that they have, that's what it is. But Montreal is that team right now that you got to look at them and say, hey, the way they are built, they could explode. And their last 10 games are 7-2-1. The way they are built, they have Laine, who has shown flashes of being an amazing goal scorer. You have Caulfield, who ripped up the U.S. Development program. You have Suzuki, who could be a really good first-line center. And not only to mention their goaltending and their defense and what they have. If they add at the deadline, which is very likely for the position they're in, I can see Montreal, out of all those teams, start to sneak up on a team that is maybe in a wild card or even a divisional position and take that spot just off the way they're playing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I want to go back to Ottawa for a second before I address Montreal. Literally, over the weekend, you saw the tale of who they are. On Thursday, they dropped their 4-0 game against the Sabres, and they come back on Saturday and beat the Penguins 5-0. So they get shut out to a team that we didn't even mention in the race, but then they shut out a team that's right in the conversation with them. And if you watched either one of those games, they look like a whole different team in that Pittsburgh game compared to Buffalo. And that really, I mean, you got to ride what you did with Pittsburgh, because if you play like you did against Buffalo, you're out. It's not even in the conversation anymore. Montreal, definitely going to add. They just lost their first game with Patrick Laine when he records a point. It was the first game they've lost this year, and that was to Dallas the other night. So
Wow.
I hate to hinge it on a player, but they really seem to just go when he's in the lineup.
Yeah.
So I mean, if he stays healthy, they should be okay. I agree with you. I think they could definitely make a playoff spot this year. And I've heard people also say, with the conversation of, over the years, it was always wait for the Atlantic to flip, where you're going to see Boston, Toronto, Florida kind of fall down, and you're going to see Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa rise. Well, now it's almost like you could take Buffalo maybe out of the conversation, because they might be selling off some young pieces, which we'll get to in a couple minutes. But you could add Montreal into the conversation of now it's Montreal, Ottawa, and Detroit that could take over that division in the next couple of years.
Well, it's like when you're talking about teams falling off, with the position that Tampa's in, I know they're third in the Atlantic, but with how red hot some of these teams are, do you see Tampa maybe even holding on to a wild card spot? Because yes, they have games in hand, but they haven't been the Tampa Bay we've seen them to be. Like, what are you thinking here?
Is that partially due to the subtraction of Stamkos? I mean, I know Stamkos going to Nashville hasn't done much this year, but you lose a leader like that and you kind of look like a different team the very next season.
I would say yes or no. Jay, do you have any thoughts on that?
Not particularly. I haven't watched a whole lot of Tampa this year.
Yeah.
If they're playing any team that I'm watching, I'm paying attention, but I'm not not super in the know with them.
It's all good. When it comes to the Lightning,
I think it comes down to the end of January, because like I said, they got to play the Red Wings twice and they got Montreal once in there. If they go, if they don't even come out of those 3 games with a point, I think we could be talking about them not making the playoffs this season.
Yeah. Well, it's because right now I have TSN pulled up. If you see me looking this way, that's what it's for. They have 3 games in hand on Toronto, who's first in the Atlantic, 2 games in hand on Florida, who's in front of them. You also got 4 games in hand on Boston, who's underneath you, 1 game in hand on Ottawa, and 1 game in hand on Detroit, and 1 on Montreal. So these teams are hightailing you, and if you lose 1 game that's not in regulation, or if you lose a game that's in regulation, you could be talking about teetering on a wild card spot. But then you get into the point of, you look at the way the standings are. If you string together a few losses and you can't bring things together, there could be a team just waiting on the outskirts, ready to knock you out. Now, we saw last year with the way certain teams are built. I'm not going to name anybody, but there could be some teams that could get in and they're out in 4 games. Like, you never know with the way that playoffs are built, but I don't know if I can look at a team teetering from the outskirts looking in and say, okay, maybe they could do some damage in playoffs, because playoffs is very hard hitting and it's an incredibly different game from the regular season, and we all know that. So, and I feel like that kind of brings us into our next point, a team that could be doing something great, and that's the Detroit Red Wings. Chris, they've strung together 7 straight wins, and there's some trade speculation surrounding them. I'm going to let you take it away.
So the other day I saw, and we talked about this, I believe, if not last week, the week before, where I brought up there was, before the holiday shutdown, scouts between the Red Wings and Sabres at each other's games, and everyone was trying to figure out what the trade could be. It's now come out that it seems like the deal was done, from what it sounds like, right before shutdown, like right before the roster freeze, for Dylan Cozens to go to the Red Wings. Now, who knows what the return may have been. I haven't seen anything what it could have possibly looked like. Obviously, don't think it's coming cheap, but that fits in perfectly to what the Red Wings need. They need a second-line center. And honestly, the idea as a Red Wings fan of having him center a line with possibly DeBrincat and Kane on either side of him excites me, because that first line right now with the 7-game win streak of Larkin, Kasper, and Raymond has seemed like they've gelled. I mean, Kasper probably, I think yesterday was his 3rd or 4th game on that top line, because it was Joe Veleno when McClellan took over. But now Kasper, I believe, is on a back-to-back point streak. It might even be 2 points in the last 2 games. 2 points per game in the last 2 games. But adding a center like that allows you to move somebody like Kopp down to the 3rd line, and move things around a little bit more, and maybe even clear out some space where maybe Kopp is in the deal. I can't really see it. I don't know who would want him, but might be something to look at.
With kind of the whole thing with Kopp is, he's more built to be a top 9 player. Is he excels in a third line role, but he's a player that you promote when you need him to be in that role. That's the exact mold he played in Winnipeg, and he's played that well in Detroit. So even when he was with the Rangers, he was great on the third line, but when you need him to play up, he steps up. It's like Alex Iafallo at the moment. So
I kind of like him on the idea of the third line playing with Tarasenko. I mean, that wouldn't be a bad line whatsoever.
and I don't want to say it's a sheltered role, but it's what he's done in his career, and that's where he's excelled, and that's where he's looked his best. So that could be a great addition for the Red Wings to do. I don't want to say addition by subtraction, but you get what I'm saying essentially.
I'd be more concerned with what they have to give up to get him. Like, that's what worries me. What is Buffalo asking for? Because there's obviously some young guys that, like somebody we talked about the other day, like Sandin Pellikka. Is he a guy that Buffalo's going to want? Obviously, I don't think Detroit's giving him up, but that's where it starts to worry me, is what one of those assets that they have that played in maybe the World Juniors or is playing overseas and not with them yet, where they say, we're kind of loaded here, let's move on from them. But at the same time, it's a piece that gets you over the hump in 3-4 years and get you to a Stanley Cup. Because Steve Yzerman keeps talking about we're not there yet. We're there for right now. We're a playoff team. We're not a Stanley Cup team. And so, like, obviously, I think he sees it too, where there's those players coming that are going to get them over that hump. I don't want to see them make the mistake and move off of one of them that hurts them for a player like Cozens, who is going to help them, but it could also hurt you in the long run as well.
And when you mention Sandin Pellikka, I don't see Detroit being open to give Buffalo one of their top defensive prospects when Buffalo is so loaded with defense right now. Like, on paper, Buffalo has one of the best defense in the league, hands down, or one of the best. That might be a hot take to some people, but when I see a defense that has Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, and Bowen Byram on it, I like the prospect of that. If you add Axel Sandin Pellikka, and if he can perform in Buffalo or even in Detroit, hypothetically in Buffalo, actually, let me correct myself there. And if he can perform in Detroit like he did at the World Juniors, then he'll have a great NHL career, and he's got a lot to work towards, obviously, but is that a piece you really want to give up for a second line center right now?
Nope.
Like, if I'm a GM right now, I don't want to. I would look at Sandin Pellikka, and I would almost be venturing to say, is he untouchable at the moment? And Chris, do you think he's untouchable at the moment, or is he in the conversation for a bigger piece?
For me right now, I think he's untouchable.
Okay.
I think he's the piece that they need to anchor. Nothing against Seider, and I like Seider. He's your top defenseman, but I think realistically, Pellikka is going to be their power play defenseman on the top unit, and I don't think you're moving off of that.
And the Red Wings, we've heard about the Yzer plan and whatnot for years and all that, and it gets a little hairy when you see the signings they made in the offseason and who they have now, but hindsight can be 2020, and people I've read all over Twitter or X, whatever you'd like to call it. I've read all over about people knocking on Steve Yzerman for saying they are a playoff team, not a Stanley Cup team. How many teams can you look at right now in the NHL and truly say they are a Stanley Cup team?
Probably 6.
I was going to say there's probably about 5 to 6 teams that I can truly look at the standings and say, you know what? I think so. And with that said, how many teams in the league right now can you look at and say they're not a Stanley Cup team, but give them in 2 to 3 years and watch the standings flip and watch them become that Stanley Cup contending team. We all know the window for a Stanley Cup contending team is not very long, which is why when a team is in that window, it's you're all in or you're not. And arguably, we've seen teams the last few years be in that Stanley Cup contention window, but they don't get over that hump because maybe they didn't have the right piece. Maybe they didn't. Maybe something just didn't click, and maybe they didn't push hard enough against a certain opponent, or just maybe it was all down to the luck they had. Like, it's so hard to point your finger on and say for a Stanley Cup contending team. And kind of circling back my thought here, if the Detroit Red Wings added Dylan Cozens right now, Chris, do you think that, and Jade as well, Chris and Jade, do you think if the Detroit Red Wings added Dylan Cozens right now for the player that he is, do you think that makes them remotely in the conversation of a Stanley Cup contending team?
No.
I don't think so, no.
Yeah, okay.
They're on kind of a heater right now, obviously. I had to watch really, really, really awful hockey with them and the Kraken yesterday. And yeah, I don't think that they're going to be in the Stanley Cup team, even if they do add somebody like Dylan Cozens. So
now, kind of with that in mind, if the Detroit Red Wings, with the projection that they are going to be as a team, do you see if they add a piece like Dylan Cozens, which is the second line centerpiece, if they add a second line center in 2 years from now, do you think that could get them to that point that they're looking to be that Stanley Cup contending team? Or do you think it's just going to be the adversity that this team needs to face together to build to that Stanley Cup contending window?
I think this young core needs to get playoff experience before they get to that point. I mean, Larkin, I think, got there only his rookie season. If not, it was his second season. But
One of them.
Seider and Raymond haven't been there. You know, obviously we know Kane has, but realistically, when this team is competing, I don't know if Kane's a Red Wing or if he's still playing in the NHL. I don't really know. DeBrincat has not been there. I don't believe. No. I don't think Chicago was good when he was there, unless it was like the beginning of his career as well.
Yeah.
But so I think they need to get that playoff experience, and then once the other young pieces come in, they'll have the leadership in Raymond, Seider, Edmondson, and Larkin that will be able to take those guys under their wing and get them ready to go when it comes playoff time and do what they have to do.
And kind of with that said, and my next thought is, are you hoping that you were entering the primes of players like Seider and Raymond when they have that playoff leadership experience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're starting to see the player that Lucas Raymond's going to be now, like the early signs of it. He's coming into his own. He's having one of his best offensive seasons. Seider looks great. You know, he's obviously more physical this year than I think he has been in more recent years, obviously. But especially it's like a different look, like I said, under McClellan. I mean, you're seeing guys like Jonathan Berggren come into his own. What was it? I think it was the Buffalo or Columbus game a couple weeks ago where Tyler Mott had that beautiful play down to Berggren, who scored the game winner. I mean, you're just seeing guys who weren't doing anything under Lalonde coming out of their shell and becoming better hockey players all around.
Guys who were given roles, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah. And that just kind of going on with the theme of trade talk and where teams may or may not be is Oliver Bjorkstrand and Andre Burakovsky's names have kind of popped up in trade talk. And Jade, as a resident Seattle person or writer here, I'll let you take that one away.
So we talked about this. This might have been the last episode that I was on because I've had a couple really ridiculous weeks. But that was after the Borgen trade, and since then I've been kind of keeping an eye on what's going on with the Kraken. I was keeping an eye on what's going on with the Kraken, but a little bit more with like trade stuff. And Burakovsky is a name that we've heard. We, the media, and people online, everything, have heard being talked about for a trade this year at the deadline. And it's he's one of those guys that I think that he would have a better chance somewhere else personally. And then Bjorkstrand is a guy that I have kind of mixed feelings on him leaving the Kraken. He's good where he fits in with the Kraken, but another guy that I feel like he could go to a different team and kind of thrive and be a little bit better somewhere else, better utilized even. But then with that, Elliot was saying that Will Borgen asked for the trade, which this is super quick hit, but did not expect that being said. I feel like I'd heard that, but wasn't positive. But yeah, I'm thinking that come the trade deadline, Seattle's going to be making quite a few bigger moves.
Okay. Well, Chris, you have anything to add to that quick?
Nope. I'm going to be interested to see what Seattle does, especially with the spot they're in right now in the standings.
Yep. And then Saturday on Sportsnet, I think I don't have Sportsnet, so I can't remember if that's actually where it was, but Friedman also said that Todd Lewicki flew out to Buffalo to meet the team, which he's the CEO of the Kraken, and he doesn't typically go on road trips. So now there's a little bit of speculation of what's going to happen next. And the GM, Ron Francis, wasn't on the trip, and he also flew out to Buffalo to meet them. So I'm expecting some changes, I think.
And kind of building on that, when you look at the way that Seattle is built, on paper, they have a great team.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, they should be better than they are.
I agree.
They've made moves. They've added players. I don't see why they are where they are. Maybe I'm missing something, but go ahead.
There's some defensive, offensive, and goaltending issues. There's just kind of little problems all around the board that it seems like they're not really able. It's not easy for them to fix, and a lot of it is that they've kept the core of the team from when they made their playoff run in their second year, and they've made a few small changes and added in a few key players, but the bulk of the team is still the same, really. And it's just, I feel like it's just not gelling the way that the fans expect it to.
Yes, well, I see what you're saying. From the few Kraken games I've been able to watch this year, is defensively the team is better than they are offensively, and it might not show with their goal differential. It might not show kind of with the way that they play in their own end. You can see on the way that they attack and the way they defend the neutral zone and the way that they transition as a team. What's concerning me is the whole two-way, 200-foot kind of play of the entire team on the ice. It's when you talk about a disconnect, it seems like, I don't want to say too much because I'm not there in person. I'm not credentialed for that team, but just the way that they are playing from the back end to the front end, it seems like it could be something there. But like I said, that's purely what I'm saying and what I'm observing from a television screen. So
yeah,
kind of going off of what you're saying and in their position in the standings, like, you're 8 points out of a playoff spot, or you're actually 9 points out. You're 8 points out of tying the first team out, but you're 2 games behind Vancouver. Vancouver has 2 games in hand on you. Sorry. And how do you look at this? Do you look at this team and say, oh, they can go on a St. Louis Blues miracle run and sneak into a wild card spot?
There's no way.
Yeah.
I do not see that happening. Yeah.
Yeah. I can say that for other teams too, where I see that not being the case as well. But the playoff race is tighter this year. We can all agree with that, right?
Mhm.
I can also see just the way that teams are built. We're going to start to, like, maybe we're seeing cracks in teams around game 50 or 60 rather than game 20 and 30 this year. Maybe that's the way that things are built this year. Because we went into the season, every team had a captain. I don't think there was an interim coach either. So it was a different start. So it seemed like every team had a system and a belief system in place. So are we
Every
going to
team kind
look?
of had their ducks in a row.
Yeah, essentially. And are we going to go into the next few games and we might start to see teams decide on, is it time to call if we're going to be in the playoffs or not? And on Friday I was listening to 32 Thoughts. One of the most interesting things in that conversation was they were saying is they really only think there are 5 teams out of playoff conversation. Well, the reason I disagree with that is you can look at teams at where they are and look at their roster and say, you know what, they might be overperforming for what they have at the moment. But the interesting thing that I listened to was how they didn't count a team like Seattle out. They said that it would be a tough mountain to climb, but they also, like Friedman and Bukowskis, never counted them out, and they never said, like, oh, they're a guaranteed lock to miss the playoffs. So
I think that if Yanni Gord comes back and stays healthy and Vince Dunn stays healthy and the D core doesn't explode and they can all stay healthy, and then Jordan Eberle comes back on schedule, which he's not even scheduled to come back until like March, I think. But if he miraculously makes it back at all this season, then maybe they could pull it together and make playoffs. But I don't feel very optimistic about their season or the team as a whole currently.
yeah, and I feel like that kind of leads me well into my next point, but a team that doesn't have a lot of optimism at this point in time, and that's the Nashville Predators. And well, there's now trade talk surrounding one of their centers, Ryan O'Reilly. Chris, take it away.
So from what I had seen was Elliot Friedman had said the other day, I saw it this morning. I saw somebody put it that he said Saturday, but it is what it is. Teams have apparently been calling the Predators, inquiring about the availability of Ryan O'Reilly on the trade market. He's signed to a multi-year deal, and the Predators are telling the teams that despite not having a no movement or no trade clause, that they might honor the request. They're going to approach him about it if a deal does come into place, and they'll see if he does have any interest of going there, and they'll move on from there. But it sounds like they don't want to move him, but they kind of understand where they're at right now with, the conversation was right from the get-go where they struggled out of the gate of moving players anyways. And you saw it, I think they made 2 trades, or 3 trades actually, right out of the gate, where they're moving pieces around, including a backup goalie that they just signed. So I'd be surprised if he's moved, but if they get blown away by an offer and they go to him and he's okay with it for a chance to win a cup again, then I can see it happening. But it's a lot of moving variables to see it happen.
Yeah, so the Saturday headlines thing that you're referring to, the exact wording was treat it like he has a full no move clause. And that's what you're kind of alluding to there, but exact wording, in my opinion, is the way that it should kind of be said there. But with the way that O'Reilly has played, our team's going to want, because he is a great two-way player. Don't get me wrong. He's a great role guy to have, but he's kind of moved away from playing as a center lately. Our team's going to want a guy who was really good before as a center and is now moved away from that role that he was so good in. How, like, where are you finding value and giving up a lot of pieces for a guy who isn't playing his natural role? Do you kind of get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, for me, and maybe this is why I'm not a GM or anything, but I would want a guy playing in his natural role. And who knows, maybe we see a team, like we could see a team like Calgary or Edmonton just add the veteran piece that they want. Or I wouldn't even rule Vegas out, because we saw the Hurdle trade break out of nowhere last year. And I'm not speculating anything or alluding to anything, but if O'Reilly has a chance to win another cup, and like you said, Chris, they could approach him and say, hey, this is on the table and it's something we don't want to really refuse. Are you good with it?
Mm-hmm.
And it could be a trade like that. So, do you have anyone have any more thoughts on this?
No, I'm
Well,
interested to see what happens, but that's pretty much
yeah.
it.
I'm
And
interested to see what they move. Like, if it's not O'Reilly, they're doing something. Like, it's
oh yeah,
the guy they're looking
definitely.
to moving. There's a lot of pieces there that they could potentially look into moving.
Well, speaking of another piece that they could be looking to move, is what about Luke Shen on defense? Because I'm not saying you're going to fetch the moon for him, but you can get a good second or third round pick for him. It's like you can get something, but it's not nothing at the end of the day. But then again, does Nashville need another future piece? So
Probably not.
Yeah, there's
Seems
a lot.
Like they need something now.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables, and with Nashville's, they're 15 points out of a wild card spot at the moment. I don't think they've set their sights on a dance in the postseason, but I do know they probably set their date with getting some pieces that'll help them revitalize whatever they can for the season and take whatever they can. So, with that kind of said, yeah, thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Inside the Rink podcast. It's the three of us. We're finally together again, and yeah, we look forward to doing this again next week. And yeah, take care.
Later, guys. Have a good week.